All right, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning or this afternoon, depending on where you're at. I see people are starting to file in, so we'll give people a couple minutes, Curtis, maybe 2 or 3 minutes after the hour, and then we're going to geek out on workflows today. I'm fired up about this conversation. I am so grateful that you joined us. But while we wait for people to kind of filter in, let's have a little icebreaker question.
All right.
As you guys are kind of sitting there, I would love to hear from everybody. Your favorite show right now. Is anybody watching a good show? Type it in the chat. I need some show recs.
Ooh. I, I'm in the middle of like 13 shows right now though.
You're one of those people.
I can't, sometimes it gets overwhelming.
That's really funny to me. I would do that, but my husband wants to watch a show in its entirety before we move on to the next one.
That makes sense. Ooh, somebody put
The Trump show.
Shogun.
This is good, you guys.
Shogun is
is
one of the ones
good.
I'm watching, and it is incredible. It's
Okay.
the only reason that I have not finished it yet is we normally don't put it on till like late at night, and I get so sleepy trying to remember to read the subtitles.
Okay.
That's the most Curtis statement I've ever heard about life.
But it's not that I don't like to read. I have the subtitles on everything.
So do I.
You need them, but Shogun is incredible on Hulu.
On Hulu. Okay.
Shogun
That's
is
good to know.
good.
Ozark.
But Zoe's
That's
like
a
me.
really good one. I can't wait for another season of that.
Which one?
Ozark.
Ozark. I started that one. I got halfway into it and just I don't remember why I stopped, but it's one of those like I don't see it, so it doesn't exist anymore things.
It's a darn good show. All right. We're a couple minutes after the hour. We got a lot to cover today, Curtis. How do you feel about just getting going?
I'm ready. I'm excited.
So that being said, we'll start quick little introduction, go over the agenda, and then we'll dive into the meat and potatoes. Catherine is an angel. She's joining us today. She's going to be monitoring the chat and the Q&A. So if you have questions along the way, please feel free to type them in there. We have another workflow expert managing the chat, the Q&A, and at the end, we will open it up and we can all pepper Curtis and myself with workflow questions. So that being said, I'll go ahead and share my screen with y'all. Thank you again for joining us today. We are going to take a deep dive into all things Redtail Workflows. My name is Kate Guillen. I'm the founder of Simplicity Ops, and I am just very grateful that Curtis took time out of his day today to hang out with me and chat about all things workflows. I'm sure many of you recognize Curtis. He's kind of a legend, a celebrity in his own right. So thank you again, Curtis. I'll let you do a brief little intro and then let's get after it.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate the kind words. Legend just means I've been here 11 years. So 11 Jerry. 11 Dairy? Is
there
that
you
works?
go.
Almost. We're gonna combine. So I've been with Redtail for over 11 years now. I'm based out of Sacramento. And I have dubbed myself the workflow wizard. But I like that we've upgraded here to workflow king, really appreciating that crown. You can also see that is an old headshot. My beard is much more gray and less hair on top, but that's okay. That's okay.
I love it. Well, I have learned a lot from you over the years, so I'm very grateful that you're going to share your knowledge with our community today. So that being said, here's kind of what we're going to go over today. I want to talk about the basics of like what is a workflow, talk about the benefits of workflows, examples of workflows, what is the whole workflow whiteboarding concept? Why is that important? How do we get adoption? How do we take advantage of automations? One of the biggest questions we get is when are we using activities versus workflows? And then open it up for Q&A. So it's kind of a casual conversation, but I want to pick Curtis's brain here and have a little healthy debate, if you will, on some of these topics. And so I think, Curtis, let's just start at the basics here. In your opinion, like what is a workflow?
Absolutely. So there is a difference between workflow and Redtail workflows. So most of the time when in the industry, people say workflow, and just like that's the flow of your work, the process you're creating. But in this specific question, like what is a Redtail workflow is a repeatable task management process. Like that's normally like my go-to elevator pitch of a workflow. It's a repeatable task management process. If there's something that you are doing as a process that needs to be done the same way every single time, normally I suggest, hey, let's see if we can build it as a workflow. And again, the point is it comes down to task management. We need to assign a task that needs to be completed so we can move on with the actual flow of work in that original term of workflow.
I like that. I'll piggyback on that. I see it as like it's a standard operating procedure.
Yes.
It's a checklist. Like people try to overcomplicate it, and it is. Well, if we're talking about Redtail, it is a series of steps and tasks that I know you're going to get into that just tell you how to do your job. And so I want to, we'll dive into specific examples, but I want to hear from you too, Curtis. First, like in your own words, what are the benefits of utilizing the Redtail workflows? And then I also want to hear if you would share like your client's perspective, like what are the benefits that they have felt after adopting and implementing workflows?
Yeah, absolutely. Two words come to mind, consistency and accountability. Like those are the two things I think of with like why we need to use workflows. Consistency is one of the biggest ones. I say this a lot of times, consistency is key. Like it is part of it. We need to consistently do things the same way every single time. And that a workflow allows to have that blueprint of this is how we're going to go through the process. Make sure that nothing like gets missed, nothing's going to fall through the cracks. We're going to make sure that we are consistently going through the same process every single time. And on the other end of it is the accountability aspect is, hey, who is responsible for the different sections of our process? Just to be able to pull up and say, hey, this is where we're at in our workflow. We're on step number 2, and that has things assigned to these people. Like that is, you are accountable. Something is assigned to you, and you can actually make sure that those are going to get done. In all honesty, like I like to use it as like it's a tattletale as well. Like the accountability part is like, hey, we can see that you are not, doing your part of it, or somebody's not doing their part. That accountability is going to make sure that everything will continue to happen. I'm a big person for accountability. Like I need to have those tasks out there. I need other people to see that I have responsibility, because that's what's going to make me actually, follow through with things, is honestly judgment.
No, I appreciate that. And, one of the things I hear most often is that consistency piece, and not just consistency like internally in the office, knowing like exactly how to execute whatever the request is and being able to do it, at scale. That consistency also just brings a level of confidence to the team that they know what's expected of them, talking about accountability, but also consistency in the client experience, right? So the client knows that they're going to get a consistent experience regardless of who on the team is, managing their request or whatever it is. So that is a really key word there. I appreciate your insights on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I like how you're saying, just like it's that consistency gives the people to, make sure. I already lost my train of thought with that, but yes, like the consistency is going to hold it. So like, hey, the client is not going to see any cracks in you at all. Like that's the whole thing. It's like we are working as a team. This is a team-oriented process. If one person isn't holding up their end, the workflow gives you the ability to step in and make sure that you can also help. So it's not just saying they have the responsibility. A team effort is just that. You need to know, can I jump in and help as well?
I love that you said that. And in addition to being able to pick up where somebody else left off, from a business management standpoint, going back to your accountability word, it allows you to see like a full picture of what's going on within the practice. Where are we at on specific requests? Are there bottlenecks? And if so, how do we resolve them so it's a more fluid flow? I think that's really helpful things to keep in mind as you start to think through like what should be a workflow.
Yeah, even think about like new employees. Like if you add a new employee to your database, having workflows set up is like you said, those standard operating procedures, but having them in there doesn't mean that you need to teach them everything about it. The workflow is telling them what needs to happen next. So they're not asking, what do I need to do next? They're asking, hey, I see this task. How do I accomplish it? So they know what the process is. It's there written into the CRM so that they can, again, be accountable for their stuff as they're new and learning everything else about your business.
Yeah, they become a delegation tool. So let's
Absolutely.
go deeper into that. And let's talk about like what are workflows? What are some examples? Like what should I be using workflows to help manage? And so you touched on something, and I always make a joke that, a workflow is anything that's repeatable. And, we were at Orion Ascent a couple weeks ago together, and I think you were probably sitting in there when I heard this. Somebody said a workflow is anything that's done more than 3 times and has more than 3 steps. And I like that. Of course, there's some like, you can kind of bend the rule a little bit there, because I'm also a fan of like single step workflows, aka a checklist that we store in the CRM. But it's just a good thing to start thinking through when you're looking at like, what is your team doing that we should have a workflow to help them manage. And so I want to get your opinion here. The new prospecting client onboarding process is a super repeatable process. How do you recommend people workflow this process? Are they individual workflows? Like I have it bulleted out here. Is it one long onboarding workflow? I want to pick your brain there and hear your best practice.
I have seen combinations of a long workflow and smaller workflows. I think we kind of agree on this, where it's just like smaller workflows are better, but I like to really narrow it down to smaller goals. Like, don't necessarily think about the workflow as a whole. Think about like, what is the goal that you're trying to accomplish? So a lot of the times, for instance, maybe you are trying to schedule a discovery meeting or an introductory call, but like we need to schedule something. So the idea of a call cadence workflow might come into play. That's a task management saying, hey, every few days I need to reach out to ask them when we can schedule something. But once that meeting is scheduled, there's a new goal. The meeting is the goal now, and I need to prep, execute, and follow up on that. So again, like narrowing it down to the smaller goals to accomplish those small processes. So like Redtail workflows are just a smaller part of your overall workflow, and we just need to find out what those specific goals are.
That's really interesting. I have a little bit of a different perspective. You say goals. When I'm writing workflows, specifically the prospecting workflows, I'm optimizing for flexibility.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is, I don't know about you, but like most of the time, this process doesn't go perfectly like linear, right? Sometimes, you have an introductory call, they're uber qualified, they're not going to go through this whole process. They just want to sign custodial paperwork and move on. Okay. I want to allow for that level of flexibility to jump forward. Or you have an introductory call and they're like, oh, I really want to involve my spouse on the next call. I'd like, he or she to meet you, whatever. And we can redo that introductory call. I want to have flexibility in this process. And that's why I've moved away from one long onboarding workflow and broken it up into like specific meeting chunks to allow for the flexibility when it arises.
Absolutely. And even like, as you consider these, what you might need to break out, think of it, what might need to be happening at the same time. Because as we know, in a Redtail workflow, it's always one step at a time. So each step I can only focus on. So if you're ever finding yourself saying, hey, there's this step and I also need to be working at this at the same time, it's probably because those steps, even though you want them in the same workflow, should be in different workflow processes.
Interesting.
You have 2 different workflows going for the same contact at the same time.
Yeah.
So even though, hey, we're trying to schedule this meeting, but their first onboarding meeting is already booked, so that has a workflow going, but I want to get their second meeting, whatever these different processes are, it's just, again, like taking it down and seeing like, what is the main goal or the end result that we need to get. That's
really interesting. I appreciate your perspective on that. Yeah, but I think we both agree that one long onboarding workflow doesn't work.
I like to say, like, I have seen it be successful. And this is what I tell everybody who normally wants to go against advice that we give, is it actually comes back to consistency. If you are going to go against the advice of how something is set up, but you say, hey, like, it works for me if I do this, if it works for you, I want you to do it, but stay consistent with that. So make sure that everyone else in your office is also doing that same process. Again, consistency is key. If you're going against advice and you want that long workflow, you can make it work as long as you're consistent and everybody else in your database understands what's happening.
I'm so glad you brought that point up. I say this so many times when we meet with clients. Like, I don't really care to be right or wrong here. It's not like a my way or the highway thing. I'm going to give you recommendations based on my experience and what I've seen done really well and work really well. But like, at the end of the day, if you want to keep doing it your way, all that matters is mutual adoption by the entire team. As long as everybody's doing it consistently, you win.
Exactly.
It doesn't have to be black and white.
I like that. It doesn't need to be right or wrong. Like, again, like I feel the same way. If you tell me I don't agree with it, I totally get it. But it's all about the consistency coming down to it. It's like, hey, it doesn't matter right or wrong. Do what's best for you.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That consistency is a theme here. And I think
I've been talking about consistency for a long time. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're good. Okay, I want to keep talking about other examples of workflows, and I'm sure you can give me some more examples, but I wasn't joking when I said a workflow is like literally anything that's repeatable. And I feel like when I try to figure out what should be a workflow, I literally look at like, what is my team doing more than a couple times? It has more than 3 steps, and start to like bullet out that list. And here's some examples of repeatable things that happen within an investment advisory practice that, in an effort to not reinvent the wheel, or like you were saying, worry about things slipping through the cracks, have a standard operating procedure, aka a workflow in place housed in your CRM.
Exactly. Yeah, there's so many different options. And again, like even we look at this, you see like account closure or even account opening, their goal is, hey, what the end of it is, we know exactly what it is based off that process. We're setting this up to close out an account, whatever that process might be. I honestly see most of the time, I think for when I'm training and talking to people, most of the time I'm dealing with workflows that are around meetings. Most of the time, the examples I give are, I always refer to client review, annual review, things like that. But any meeting you have, there's a clear step to that: prep, execute, follow up, prep, execute, follow up. And even like that just basis of the meeting can be built into the onboarding meeting, the discovery meeting, the client review meeting. All these different examples of different meetings can all have the same base and foundation that you get to build out of. And you'll notice once you see that, you'll see all the other processes you do will fill in line with other examples.
That's interesting. And going back to consistency, the way you get that consistency across the team is by having a workflow in place to be able to delegate responsibilities and rest assured that that meeting is going to run the same way because that workflow has been deployed to the entire team and delegated responsibilities appropriately.
Absolutely.
I understand. Interesting. So I don't know how you feel about this, or like if you have specific examples, but I find that workflows extend themselves beyond just like client servicing requests. You know, my background is in operations. There's operational things that firms are doing that are repeatable, that are done more than 3 times and have more than 3 steps. And I think that we should have workflows for those things too, even though they're not client specific, they're more operational in nature. But like, I mean, you could throw in here like running payroll or, you know, bringing on a new hire. One of the things that you just said really resonated with me, and that is being able to pick up where somebody else left off. Should you be out of the office, business should not come to a screeching halt. I should be able to pick up where you left off because you have deployed a workflow that now I can step into. And if your responsibility is running payroll or billing or whatever, now I can fill in for you and work through that workflow and get the job done, even though you're out.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then that's, again, like that is one of the biggest things is it is a team effort. We are all supporting each other for that goal. I like, this is a while ago, before we've changed like our internal, this is for like Redtail internally. We used to, anytime we hired a new employee at Redtail, there was a workflow that employee went through for their first week about what they actually needed to learn. And it had nothing to do with like how to use Redtail, but about like, hey, on day one, they need to do their HR paperwork and different things that is required for a new employee. And what I really liked about having an employee new hire workflow was it taught them how to actually use the workflow. So they were learning the Redtail system as they were learning everything else about the company. So it's like they had to go in and complete that they met with different teams and things like that and learned how to manage it. And I found that's a really easy way. If you're using the tools at your disposal for your new employees, hey, they're going to learn it as they're learning everything else, which is really beneficial.
That's really interesting. I've never thought of that as being a benefit, but it totally is. It's getting them familiar with the workflow system while they're working through their new hire onboarding process.
Exactly. I've always been a fan of like, I can't teach something I don't actively use. You know, it's like I am a big fan of using the Redtail calendar because I am going to know what people are actively doing when they are using the calendar or workflows. So if and I find that people fight the system a lot of like, well, we do everything in Outlook. It's like that's fine. We have everything on spreadsheets. That's fine. But if it's all in one spot in the Redtail CRM that everyone has access to, it's going to set you up for more success later on.
I won't get on my soapbox, but I believe in that wholeheartedly. And that's literally why we do what we do. By optimizing your CRM as like the hub of your practice for contacts, tasks, your sales pipeline, your calendar, your accounts, workflows, your service model, like it literally, and you've seen it, allows you to cut down on so many unnecessary external places that you're going to manage your business that as a result help you become wildly more efficient and allow you to better serve your clients and spend more time doing the things that you are best at, which I just think is something that people overlook when they think about utilizing their CRM.
Yep.
All right, I have a question for you here. And so one of the things that I get is like, okay, workflows, that's fine and dandy. And I get what they are. I get, some examples of like repeatable processes that should be workflows, but how do you get started? Like, how do you actually write and implement a workflow?
That's a big question. It really is. And honestly, it can be scary to start from scratch. And I know that like you have resources available. We have resources at Redtail, but for those who are really saying, hey, I'm starting from scratch, I want to build this, we use the phrase whiteboarding a lot. And so we all honestly suggest you want to sit down and whiteboard out that process. And whiteboarding can mean so many different things to people. It can mean straight up, I'm using a whiteboard and I'm writing things down and writing out what the process is. I'm going to tell you a fun story. This is actually an internal about Catherine actually might have been involved in this back when she was with us at Redtail. But years ago with Redtail University, we actually decided to build a workflow for the event of Redtail University because there's things we need to do before it, the day of and after. And when this workflow got built out, none of the people involved except for our boss built the workflow.
Okay.
So it was just our boss who said, hey, I'm going to build it out. This is great. And then when we all looked at it, it was missing a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't wrong. By any means, it was not wrong, but it was missing a lot of things. So for that reason, I always say when you're starting out, make sure that anybody who's involved in the process is there to talk about what their role is. Because it's so easy to miss different parts of a process. Saying, hey, I'm going to do my section. I'm going to send it over to this other team. And I think that they just do these two things, but it turns out they have a bigger process behind those two tasks that they need to do. I'm going to miss out on that, and the workflow won't be as successful. And that's where I feel it falls apart for most people is things got missed, and it ends up being too much work on like just a smaller group or one person, whereas we're not taking the whole team into account. And so like that team mentality, workflows are a team mentality situation when you want to sit down with everybody and say, hey, what are the things that you do? Whether you want to grab Post-it notes, a piece of paper, a whiteboard. I like to go online. There's this free program. If you just type in draw.io,
Mhm.
in your browser, it takes you, I think it redirects you to another site, but you can draw all these shapes and arrows and things like that. Visual representation happens, visual representation is so important for me specifically, and different types of people to see things. Everybody learns in different ways. So the more options you have, the better it is to make sure that nothing's going to get missed.
No, I really appreciate that. And I learned the hard way. When I first started building workflows, I built them directly in Redtail, and earmuffs, Curtis, don't take offense to this. If you need to edit the workflow or like move tasks around, the workflow templates in Redtail are not easily manipulatable, like a whiteboarding document, workflow, a draw IO, or even like a Word doc that I'm going to show you in just a second. Like, it's so much easier to like jot it all down, get clear on like what are the steps and what are the tasks and what should be in the description outside of the CRM. Get really clear on the flow before you build it out. Learn from my mistake.
Absolutely. And I've seen that happen with a lot of people as they come in. I was like, I've done that myself too. I have gotten ahead after I have preached at people to whiteboard. I have myself jumped in and started to build something. And most of the time you'll find out, you'll get to like, hey, I'm on step 4 and realize that I didn't think of something. And again, like the whiteboarding part of it just is going to help you sketch it out. So you at least have your foundation. And that's the most important part, is the foundation. I know we talk about like moving things isn't easy, but if the foundation is there, moving things becomes a lot easier to figure out.
So talking about the foundation, can you explain to me, like in the beginning we said, okay, so workflow is comprised of steps and tasks. You have a really great analogy explaining the difference between steps and tasks and building the foundation of the workflow. Can you share that knowledge with the rest of the group here?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a few different ways I like to describe it, but one of the newer ways that I've started talking about the difference between steps and tasks is thinking about like you're planning a road trip. All right, like think of it, you're planning a road trip. So let's say there's this fun thing that I've noticed here in Sacramento, that on Highway 50, at the beginning of Highway 50, there's a sign that says Ocean City, Maryland is like 3,000 something 7 miles away. And on the other end, and I've always thought like, hey, I want to build a road trip and go to the other end. But if I'm doing that, like, hey, I know what I need to do. I need to get to Ocean City, but I need certain stops along the way. So maybe I'm going to stop from Sacramento, Lake Tahoe. I'm going to stop in Denver, Kansas City. Like I'm making all these different stops. And so the reason I like to compare it to a workflow is physically, you can only be in one city at a time. Like if I'm in Lake Tahoe, I can only do things at Lake Tahoe. So like that, in order, like the where you are is the step. I am at this city, that is the step. And now I want to take the gondola up to Heavenly. I want to go spend a day at the lake. I want to go do shopping. And then I leave Lake Tahoe and then I go to Denver. And Denver, I want to see a concert at Red Rocks. I want to do more shopping there probably, and then go to the next city. But like I can only do certain tasks or items at the city I'm at. So when you sort of space out like that, like, hey, we're going here, and then we move as a team. Your whole team is on this road trip together. We are going to these cities and these destinations together and accomplishing that.
Got it. So if I'm understanding then, the steps are chronological.
Yes.
They happen like in sequential order. The tasks or whatever you're doing in Lake Tahoe can be done in any order, but we're not going to leave Lake Tahoe until we've completed all those tasks.
Exactly.
And that is the foundation. When you're whiteboarding, you need to get clear on what are your steps and what are your tasks. So I want to show you an example of a whiteboarding document. We will, at the end of this, give everybody access to all of these docs, but I think it would be helpful, and Curtis, feel free to like shred this thing if you would do it differently. I think it's helpful for people to see and understand. But basically, here's just an example. Like literally, you guys, it's literally a Word document that I have bulleted out. What are the steps? What needs to happen first? client, we have a client meeting, and as a result of that conversation, we need to update a Benny. What are the steps that goes into it? Well, you got to get all the information that you need to prepare the paperwork. Okay. You need to make sure that we have notes in the CRM, documenting the client correspondence. We need to send out the paperwork. Okay. You got the steps, and these sub bullets are the tasks. So you can be doing these in any order. You can be preparing the paperwork and sending it out for signature and then putting in your notes next. You need to make sure once we've sent the paperwork out that we get it back, right? And what I want to point out here too, that we haven't really talked about, Curtis, is timing of workflows.
Yeah.
And how you can set target dates based on like when it's due and follow up. And I always like to, for like client service type responsibilities, make the target date today. So everything stems from today. Today, I gather all the information, I prepare the paperwork, I send it out, and then a week later, I follow up to make sure I get the paperwork back.
That target date, I think, feels intimidating to a lot of people because or just like the concept doesn't become clear. And like the target date is just it's a holder for like the most important date that sets the due dates for everything else. I like what you said, like where it's like, hey, the target date is the beginning. I've seen a lot of people who feel like, oh, the target date is the end date, is the completion date. That's not necessarily true. But if we're working, hey, day 1 is the target date, step 2 is due a day after, step 3, 3 days after that, it's based off of the most important date of the process. Whereas
I just found that to be the easiest way of explaining it and getting adoption. And so the way I think about it is like any client service request, the target date of that workflow is today. Today, you're going to start the process. Tomorrow's the next thing. The next day is the next thing, especially if it like has to do with sending out paperwork. I don't want to pepper the client tomorrow or the next day. I just want the reminder to come back up a week from now and make sure the client did whatever we asked him to do. And then the process picks back up. That's different though than a meeting workflow. And I'll see if you agree with me on this. So the target date for client service requests are today. Meeting workflow target dates are the date of the meeting.
Yes. So
that the workflow, you were explaining there's like prep, there's day of, and there's follow-up. The prep doesn't happen today. That would be a fire drill. The prep happens, a week, 2 weeks ahead of the meeting. So we're reviewing their plan, we're making any updates, or putting together, an agenda and documents or whatever, reaching out to the client to get current tax docs, whatever that looks like, with enough like breathing room, enough prep time ahead of that meeting.
Yes. And actually the road trip example, if we think about it, so think of all those different cities that I need to go to. And I want to think about how am I going to set my timeline for this? Let's say, for instance, first example is I have 2 weeks of vacation and I want to leave on this day. Hey, that's day 1, the target date. 2 days later, I'm going to be in Denver. 3 days after that, like I'm basing it off of the day, the beginning. Or maybe I mentioned Denver, Colorado. I have a concert to go to at Red Rocks. And that has a very specific date. I need to leave Sacramento 4 days before. I need to be in Kansas City 2 days after Denver. So like the important date is the concert that's happening in my road trip. Or maybe I have a flight out of Ocean City, Maryland, back to Sacramento on a specific day. That's going to be my end goal. And I need to leave Sacramento a month before, whatever that timeline is. So again, like this target date can be at all different areas of your process. But if you don't sit down and whiteboard and talk about like, what is the most important part, or what are we putting everything in relation to, it's going to be harder to figure out that due date.
I love what you're saying. And I think, kind of tying it back to this is getting clear on your steps, getting clear on your tasks. And these, even like not the sub bullet, but the sub bullet that I have here is the description. And this is something that we haven't talked about yet, is this description and the assignee. But something that I think is really interesting when you're going through the whiteboarding process, not only thinking about what are the steps, what are the tasks, what is the flow, but who on the team is responsible, and including that as part of the whiteboarding. Yes?
Absolutely. Yeah. And like, again, like, if I've seen people build out workflows and they don't give ownership to the tasks, things get missed. So if we're not thinking about who is responsible for this, things can, again, they can slip through the cracks if we are not thinking about that ahead of time.
And one thing that I love so much about workflows, in addition to like role delineation and consistency and clarity, is in the description of workflows, you can store and house email templates for, you know, consistent communication across the board. You can hyperlink documents. So let's use your road trip example. You need to get a map. I don't know who uses maps anymore, but you know, you need to download a document or your tickets or whatever, your reservation. You can embed those hyperlinks in the description of the task so that, you know, when the task comes to me, I have very clear guidelines of what needs to get done, in any document that's referenced in that task lives there in the task. I'm not having to go to an external place to find it. It's literally explicitly there in the task.
Yeah, that description inside the tasks, I see a lot of times people like to be very wordy with their task names. I am somebody who likes to say, keep it as simple as possible. Your task should start with a verb because it's an action item. So if it's not starting with a verb, it's not telling you to do something. And then the description, you can add as much information. That's where I suggest go overboard. Put more information that you need in the description sometimes, because it's not going to be in your face taking up real estate, but it's somewhere you can go back to and say, hey, I know I need to submit paperwork. If the task is just submit paperwork, the description is going to tell you, hey, where do I need to go to submit the paperwork? What does it mean? What forms?
Right.
Things like that. All the extra information can be stored in there. And so the idea of a template that you need to send out, if the task is send email number 1, the template of email number 1 should be in that task. It's giving all the information to the users in the database so they don't have to go everywhere.
I love that. Yeah, talk about efficiency. Somebody asked a really good question here. Can you hyperlink both a URL and an internal file path? Unless things have changed, Curtis, correct me. No, you can put in the URL for like in SharePoint or OneDrive or whatever, like your online cloud-based server location that's a live link.
Yes.
But the file path, you would actually like type out the file path and say where it was. Yes.
Yeah, so I'm assuming if you're talking file path on your computer, I have not seen a way for it to go to a file path in your computer. I'm sure there are tech people who there might be a workaround, but I have not seen anything possible.
We just type it in there. We copy and paste it in there. This is the file path. Yeah. It's not live, but it tells you where to go. It tells you how many layers deep that folder is. That's
I see. Yeah, okay. So you can write out the file path, but it won't be a clickable file path.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. That's what we do.
Yeah.
That's a good question. So last thing, and we'll work up whiteboarding, wrap up whiteboarding and move on. So a couple of examples we'll give you guys, like the spending change workflow I think is really helpful, but I want to just really drive my point home that workflows extend beyond client service stuff. So operationally, one workflow that we find that's super helpful is maintaining a clean database. All right. You've probably heard Curtis say garbage in, garbage out. You know, this is how we solve that by building a well-organized database, but it's imperative that we maintain it. And so this is another workflow whiteboarding document that I want to give everybody to help you assess your database on an ongoing basis to make sure that it stays clean and tidy and well maintained.
That's a really great idea, especially like I know that not everybody consistently does clean up with their data. You know, like, hey, maybe I need to, every quarter, I want to see if there's any contacts that are active clients but aren't marked with the category. Things like that, just like they aren't fitting into our structure perfectly. You can have a workflow that goes every quarter that you're starting to make sure that you're looking at these things. And like you said, like this does not need to be for one specific contact record because it's for your database. Workflows do not have to only attach to contacts. They can just be a general workflow process that everyone's involved in still.
So let me ask you this. I'm sure you get this question a lot. I sure do. How, like this all sounds great, but how do you get people to actually adopt workflows?
I would say humiliation. I joke about that a little bit, but this also goes back to accountability. Like if the ability to have on the main workflows page, like when you pull up Redtail and click on the workflows tab on the left, it'll show you every single active workflow that's going, and you can sort and you can see, hey, we're behind on these certain workflows. So you have the ability, hey, on your Friday or your Monday meetings, hey, Curtis, we noticed that you haven't done task A, B, and C. Like, what's going on with that? You know, like the actual accountability there is that, and that's just for me personally, like call me out in a meeting and you will never see me mess up again. Like, it's just like, I'm going to make sure that I get that done. That's just one small aspect, but it's also the buy-in of, people who weren't involved in the building of the process normally have a harder time actually joining the process. And so that's why it really does come back to, hey, maybe your boss built out all these steps and tasks, but it seems like way over the top for you, or maybe you need to condense them. So you end up just stop doing the tasks, or you stop. I'm not saying that you're not doing your work, but like you stop marking things as complete or things like that. I think the biggest issue that people come into, especially with smaller offices, is they don't see the benefit overall, because it will feel like you're doing more work initially. Like it's going to feel like, hey, I called that client. Now I also have to go and mark the task as complete. It feels like you're having to do an extra step. But I think once you get into that habit and do those extra tasks, you're going to realize that overall, you are going to have more control over the processes that are happening. So you are giving up some of your time to do a few extra things that's going to give you more ability later on.
But the key again is consistency. We have to get buy-in from the entire team. And in my opinion, it starts from the top down. It can't just be the client service and the operations people buying into this. The entire team needs to be on board. And this is why you're saying it's so important to have them part of the whiteboarding process, because they have some ownership, they have some ownership in building the processes. And something else we haven't talked about, but that I have found that's really, really helpful with adoption is automation. If we turn on automations so that, when you put in an activity, say you're an advisor, when you had a client meeting, and you put in an activity to change a Benny. As a result of that conversation, we've got to change a Benny. I put in a task for my team. If we turn on an automation so that I put in that Benny change task, it automatically launches the Benny change workflow because of that, activity category or whatever. There's no reason why someone could be like, oh, I didn't use a workflow. Like the workflow is automatically launched. Like, well, now you're absolutely going to follow a workflow. There's no reason, there's no argument anymore because it's automatically done for you. It kills that argument that you're having with like, well, it's actually more work. It's actually not more work. We automated it for you.
Honestly, the automations, and again, like it's a separate template tool than the workflows.
Yeah.
And the automations do work with other things than just workflows, but the benefit that they provide to you for out of sight, out of mind. So for instance, when we were talking about like, hey, I have a call cadence workflow where I'm trying to schedule their onboarding meeting. Hey, I'm reaching out, like that's part of the workflow. And I think the question I get a lot is, can one workflow start a next? Like, hey, if this workflow ends, can it start the next? The answer is no, but also yes. And the yes part is, well, what's the goal of the first workflow? Well, if the goal was to get a meeting scheduled, well, as soon as you schedule that meeting in the system, that can be a trigger for an automation to start the next workflow. And so like, that's again, like just because, hey, I scheduled the meeting, the workflow started for me. I didn't have to add an activity and add a workflow. I just did one thing and the process creates that loop already for me. So once you know the smaller goals, most of the time that answers the question of how we can go from one to the next.
I love that. That is a question that I get a lot, and I don't explain it quite that well, but workflows don't lead into the next workflow, asterisk. Yes, they do, with the appropriate language at the end of that workflow.
Yes, exactly. Like they kind of do. Now I will say like we are back here at Redtail and Orion like thinking of like how can we make things better and automate more. So you'll see like in the coming time of Redtail, there's no official date, but like 2025 we're going to see a lot of cool new things with workflows, and it's all based off of suggestion and like how we see people are actively using them.
I love that. Well, Curtis, we're 45 after. I'm going to open it up for some questions. I have one question for you. Can I be selfish and hog the questions first?
Absolutely.
I want to know, I assume you get this question as much as I do. What should be an activity template and what should be a workflow template?
Oh, see, for me, it can be a gray area.
Mhm.
Because I always tell people an activity is a one-off event.
Right.
You know, so it's like, hey, I need to submit paperwork. I need to make a phone call. I need to call this client back. It's a one-off event or even some meeting. Whereas like workflows is going to be a process around. And like we said, like, hey, it's a workflow is the process. So, but I've noticed, and I feel like with conversations with you, people will create activity templates to actually map out what their process is. And honestly, sometimes that is better. If it's just a one activity, if all I need to know is it done or not,
Mhm.
an activity can probably solve that for you. Is it done or is it not? If that's all I need to know, I say go for an activity. But if you are needing to track a process, then really I would suggest build the workflow first and then go from there. If the workflow looks too simple, you know, hey, it's just a one-step workflow with 2 tasks.
Mhm.
That probably doesn't need to be a workflow.
That's like the differentiator for me. That you nailed it on the head, at least in my opinion, is it's like if it's stagnant, if it's like a single step workflow that doesn't need to pass hands and it doesn't follow a sequence, I like to just create an activity template. It's stagnant. And I can kick it down the road if I need to, but like there is not a sequential order like there is in a workflow.
Yeah. I also like the idea of like look out for patterns. Like workflows are patterns. If you're seeing any kind of pattern with how events happen with a process, that can be built into the system as a workflow. So it's like if you have those people that have great pattern recognition, probably put them on your workflow building team.
Got it. Oh, I like that. And so a couple of other questions that have come through. I just want to reiterate, you guys. Yes, this is recorded. Yes, we will send a recording out to everybody that attended today's call. What was the other question I just saw? Oh, I think Catherine's just on top of it. She's answering all the questions. You know what I think would be really interesting, Curtis? We had a lot of questions about like, hey, will you guys actually show us how to build a workflow from scratch? I think it might be interesting to have a follow-up conversation about like, how do you do that? How do we use activity templates? How can we use the templates to create automation? I think it would be interesting if you're up for a follow-up conversation to actually get into the weeds on like
Absolutely.
how to actually build it. I know you are available to help. I've included some contact info here, you guys. Curtis has been gracious. If you guys want some training and to go deeper into this stuff, there's Curtis's contact info. If you have questions specific for me, our info. If you would like a copy of these resources, you know, you're welcome to scan that QR code and text us, and we'll get you all of the slides that we reviewed, the workflow examples, the whiteboarding examples, whatever you guys need there.
And then
Oh, look,
Redtail,
go ahead.
sorry, we do offer, I see some questions coming in. We do offer
Yeah.
some templates that we can copy into your database. If you email the training at redtailtechnology.com and ask for the Redtail templates, we'll copy those in. I've heard talk about this is Curtis learning things and saying things on webinars he probably shouldn't, but I've heard talk of we're going to have a workflow template library pretty soon, so you can just say, hey, I want these. Now with that, I always say templates are not like hit the ground running processes. Like you should always still very much understand how to build out a template. And for that, there's a workflow series that we do here at Redtail every year, and we just finished it last month. And if you even just go to our Redtail help desk or email us and ask for it, if you just search for the workflow series, it's a 4-part series where the first episode, first webinar, it's just conceptualizing and whiteboarding. It's 30 minutes of just talking about 3 different processes, a prospecting, onboarding, and a client review process, where we actually talk out and act like we're whiteboarding it out. The next video
love
that and builds it as a template. So if you're saying, I want to physically see this, come to the Redtail training team and we have those videos available for you to look at.
And I love you for saying something, and I want to set expectations to everybody. He said, whiteboarding or workflow templates alone are not the solution. Their templates are fantastic and great. Talk about not reinventing the wheel. Take the Redtail templates all day, but I want everybody to have very clear expectations that they require some customization and some love to make them feel like your own. Templated workflows alone do not work. We don't sell workflow templates because we don't find that they work. Having said that, in an effort to not reinvent the wheel, take the Redtail templates and think through, whiteboard your process, and then wordsmith them to make sense for your practice. Wordsmith them to make sense for your custodial requirements. Put in your hyperlinks to your agendas. Put in your file destinations. I feel like people are like, oh yes, Redtail workflow templates, dump them all to me. I'm going to use them tomorrow. And it's like, well, you got to give them a little bit of love to make them work.
And I have seen too where they get all of our templates and then it's sometimes too overwhelming. It's just like, oh, there's too many things here now. But again, like we give you those tools and we're available to talk. You reach out to us. Like I said, like use that training email. We have a great team of trainers here. I will say, because Catherine has been answering these questions, she used to be part of our training team and we miss her. But Simplicity was just the better place for her. And we're so glad she's there, but we do miss her.
Well, thank you. And I learned everything that I know about Redtail from you guys and the training team. So you do a fantastic job. I am deeply honored that you came and shared your afternoon or morning with us.
I'm so happy you asked me to do this. I love to just talk and bloviate about anything. So
Well, and I just feel like it's such a hot topic. People need to hear us kind of geek out about this, but we will definitely put together a follow-up, like how to get in the weeds.
yeah.
But I would encourage you to watch the Redtail Workflow series. It helped me tremendously, as I'm sure it'll help a lot of you. So that being said, looks like the questions have kind of started to mellow out. Curtis, any final parting words of wisdom, my friend?
Oh, see on the spot. I don't know, if you're gonna whiteboard, buy your team a pizza.
You know what? That's really funny. When we did it, when I was working at an RIA, we took a couple days to like work on the business, and we ordered lunch out. We sat around the conference table. We came in our comfy clothes, and we literally freaking whiteboarded.
It's honestly a whiteboard day. Actually, that sounds great. Like, let's whiteboard all the processes. Honestly, go over, whiteboard every single process and then cut out the ones you don't actually need. But when you get people involved, that's when they are going to start using the system, because part of them is in the system because they built it. They're going to want to have the success because they put a part of them into it.
I love that. So key takeaways: consistency, accountability, mutual adoption,
and teamwork.
We got to get everybody on board.
Absolutely.
Well, you are the best, my friend. Thank you so much for hanging out. Looking forward to hopefully doing another one of these in the future. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Please follow up. If anybody has any questions or wants to take a deeper dive into their systems, Curtis and I are available to, this is my favorite thing to talk about. So if anybody wants to continue talking about it with me, I'm all ears.
Awesome. Thank you again for having me.
Thank you. We'll see y'all next time.
Bye.